From Hamilton Place Strategies in Washington, D.C., this is the HPS Insights Podcast.
Welcome to HPS Insights, a podcast from Hamilton Place Strategies analyzing the current events impacting the business and political communities. I'm your host today, Brian DeAngelis, a partner here at HPS, and I'm joined by Alberto Lopez, founder and CEO of Alva, a London-based company specializing in stakeholder intelligence, and our own Matt McDonald, my fellow partner here at HPS. We're going to talk a little bit today about alva and stakeholder and reputational intelligence. For those of you who follow the podcast, you may remember we entered into a strategic partnership with alva last year. They are a growing part of the offering here at HPS, and we've been working together for several months, and we're excited to have Alberto here in the States, joining us in the podcast studio right down in DC. And I want to jump into it. So welcome, Alberto and Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Alberto, let's just start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and what Alva does and what you started several years ago when you founded the firm.
Sure. Alva started 12 years ago. We are a tech-enabled business that uses AI and NLP to fundamentally capture stakeholder sentiment in a dynamic way, i.e. in real time. How do we do it? So fundamentally, we monitor and analyze all media types globally. We look at government papers, we look at NGOs, and investor reports. And with the intelligence that we collate, we actually help companies understand how they're being portrayed across a broad range of issues and stakeholders. Just to give you a sense of the volume here, we are currently collecting data on 55,000 companies.
Wow.
Public and private companies. And we work mostly with very large organizations. We work with about hundreds of blue chip companies, mostly in the UK and in the US.
And who are you working with within those companies? I imagine that's C-suite level?
Yes, C-suite level as reputation and stakeholder analysis or stakeholder understanding of stakeholders is an issue that tends to sit at C-suite. But it varies from company to company, but typically is chief communications officer, corporate affairs, sustainability.
Arming them with the data they need to do their job, some risk intelligence, reputation intelligence, that sort of work. That's right. And
it's really about understanding how those stakeholder perceptions change dynamically. So
when you started, did you have the stakeholder focus at that point? I mean, I would say that collectively, I think we would agree that the concept of stakeholder management, thinking through long-term impacts of corporate decisions beyond kind of quarterly results has been in the ascendancy over the past several years. So is that just a fortuitous timing for you? Was it always a stakeholder focus from the beginning, or what's the origin story on that, the need case there?
Yeah, so when we started, we actually saw three things going on. One was that the trust towards business was really low post-financial crisis.
Yeah.
Second, we actually saw that the sustainability agenda was on the rise. Mm-hmm. And then what we also saw was the explosion of social media. So 2007 was a vintage year for Facebook, and Twitter was launched and so on. So we sort of put these things together, and actually I remember us looking into how are companies analyzing reputation. And all we saw was that there were few providers doing panel interviews to stakeholders, but nothing that actually collected big data. Mm-hmm. So
So you came with the stakeholder thesis, and then how do you solve and support that thesis, or was it partly looking at the explosion of data and how companies can use that more effectively in their decision making?
well, we understood that companies were going to be more accountable to stakeholders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we wanted to actually almost unpack that complexity and understand which were the issues that were driving that impact.
And you wrote about this a little bit in your book a couple years ago, this sort of trend, if you will, around the environment companies are operating in.
Wait, Brian, you have to plug the book.
I will. Don't worry. I will plug the book.
Available on Amazon.
Yes. The Connecting Leader in the Age of Hyper-Transparency, Interconnectivity, and Media Anarchy, How Corporate Leaders Connect Business with Society. And that's actually what I wanted to touch on. You had this, I think, approach of we are in a more hyper-transparent environment where companies have to be honest about what they're doing, and there's just so much more information available through that interconnectivity. People can find this on Twitter or social. There's so much going on, and it is just anarchy. And to me, that's what struck me the most working with you in the past year, of like that kind of intel that you guys are providing to that CCO, that global public affairs, to navigate that environment is kind of the data and intelligence they need to better do their jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one of the things that we've seen is that there is an undercurrent here of rethinking the role of CCOs. And whether CCOs, and I think CCOs are, there's a sort of a lot of work even from Page Society and others that actually are talking about the role of CCOs. And fundamentally, it's really about, as the research showed on the book, that actually there are 5 fundamental key skills that actually a CCO, corporate affairs director, can actually support the function with. And one of them is, and this is where this intelligence comes, it's very useful, is bringing the outside-in view of the business. How is the business really being perceived? Because actually the business, the perception of the business is formed through the communication, through the performance, and also through the values that they display, that the employees display. So, but is that actually being perceived as it's actually intended? Or because of different agendas of stakeholders, it's actually being misinterpreted.
Right.
So that's really important, but also it's about understanding, I think the role of the communications director can also play a role of connecting multiple functions on making sure that actually the company, it communicates in a sort of unifying voice.
Right.
And then it's also about connecting with key stakeholders. So actually, key stakeholders also feel included in the engagement and the decision making. But there's much more to it. It's also about what is the right narrative for the company to engage with stakeholders, and how the company can own that narrative. And finally, it's also about understanding sort of the issues that come left field, and understanding sort of the reputational risk that the companies potentially. So I think the role of the CCO has actually become far more complex, and that complexity can be addressed with better data, better intelligence.
Yeah, and help me with this, but I think obviously I'm a little biased. I have not seen in the market the type of intelligence and the type of data that you all are pulling and providing to your clients, your customers, if you will, of this. Am I right in that idea? I mean, this is really some groundbreaking stuff you guys are doing.
Yeah, and look, it's clear that we were early to market, and it's also clear that when the market is very fragmented, but what we actually have found is that the solutions out there are more focused on managing the communications workflow. planning, publishing, monitoring, and analyzing the outputs, as opposed to obtaining intelligence from all the information that's out there. My background was in intelligence. I was in an intelligence business for many years. So I always saw the content that's out there as a source of intelligence, not as a source of how would I say many professionals have looked at, okay, is our message filtering through?
Right.
And that's as far as the analysis goes. But actually, there's much more intelligence that you can actually get. So I think what's fundamentally different about Alva is that actually we have because we understand, or we think that in order to engage with stakeholders, it requires different functions to actually engage authentically. We develop a multi-tiered approach, and what that means is that actually what we are trying to do is to connect separate functions with stakeholder intelligence. So connect communications, connect sustainability, connect government relations, connect the risk team, and corporate affairs.
Which does seem to be a particular trend in our line of work. Our clients, without naming names, who are doing this well, but they are well connected with their GR function, with their investor relations function. Are you guys seeing the same trends, that this interconnectivity within the organization of that kind of communications role is key to management of stakeholder pressures?
I mean, I think that, I guess there's a couple things to pull apart on that. I would say one is that across disciplines within companies, as you get more focus on stakeholders and the need to understand them, there's a demand for some measure of measure and quantification around those that I think has historically been, if not weak, then at least anecdotal. And I think part, just as the stakes have gone up, that's natural. The other thing that I think is a dynamic in the market that we see is that, while a lot of our clients end up being in a chief communications officer role, a lot of these issues are landing on the desk of the CEO.
Right.
And in that context, both, I think there's a demand for more sophisticated tools and insights. I think that the bar has gone up in terms of the work, in terms of the quality of data, in terms of the insights. And the stakes are higher. I mean, CEOs are losing their jobs over these types of issues. And so, that implies a need for deep understanding, innovation, new approaches to a problem that I think until recently hasn't had quite the focus on as a core of business agenda item.
Yeah. And you sort of said it a minute ago, but I think for years this has been handled by gut. You had very experienced professionals and they see a crisis coming or an issue pops up and it's get in a room and what's our gut tell us the right thing to do. And that has backfired for a lot of companies in the last couple of years. I mean, stakes are getting much, much higher in this environment. We've all talked about it, unprecedented times. No one can have a gut reaction to a global pandemic. But this type of intelligence, again, I think helps inform that, helps give the data. Alberto, I'm curious, how do you continue to see this evolving as you guys continue to bring in new products to the market?
So the first thing I want to say is that reputation is complex and it's very nuanced, and it's there's a sort of a realization that actually companies have to go beyond ranking tables. They have to get into really double clicking on issues and understanding why those issues are actually driving impact to the companies or to the sectors. Why do they emerge, and when do they emerge? So I think that actually there is sort of an internal realization that, as you say, gut feel is no longer valid on its own. You actually need to back it up with more data. But also, I think that it's really important to also complement that with another aspect, which is the fact that actually you need to add more data sets, and also you need to look at new methods to actually support clients to understand, predict, and mitigate the impact of those issues. So it's no longer to do a sort of a kind of a post-match analysis, but actually really understanding what are the sort of the early signals that you need to, that are going to tell you that actually an issue is coming in full force.
Yeah.
I think, just to build on the nuance point, I think we've seen scenarios where there may be a high profile issue or loud voices, but without the nuance side of and a complete understanding of all the stakeholders. We've seen companies stumble in where they are reacting to the latest thing and don't have the perspective across the stakeholder universe that Alberto's talking about.
Yeah. Alberto, I sort of jumped over this, but you were mentioning a second ago some of the different intelligence and data you offer clients. You guys have a focus, I think, really around 5 key pillars. Can you talk us through a little bit about really the different products that you offer to folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So the as I said, the foundation of the solution is how do we equip the corporation across different functions to understand, mitigate, and to understand, predict, and mitigate the impact of stakeholder issues. In that process, there are different actors. So there's the media team, there's the corporate affairs team, there's the risk team, as I mentioned earlier. So what we have done is to actually build a solution for measuring the effectiveness of communication. We've actually that's a media intelligence solution.
Yep.
We develop a solution on reputational intelligence, which is really about understanding issues and stakeholders for the company and the peer group. So the company also can sort of assess how they're doing against the peer group. And then we've also developed a solution on ESG and how ESG is also a driver of positivity or negativity towards the company. We are now developing new models, and obviously with the work that you guys are doing, we want to sort of start exploring policy intelligence to start understanding how policymakers actually have an impact on the reputation of the company. Risk intelligence, so early warning system of issues, and finally we want to create. We want to put all this together and present it to the board, linking it to value creation. So how is all these sentiment data and reputation and so on an indicator as to whether the company is creating value or losing value?
Can we double click on the ESG offering a little bit? Because obviously there's a ton of noise in this space. It has, in my opinion at least, gone from something companies talk about and sort of trying to make either themselves or their stakeholders feel good about what they're working on. But to your last point, it's starting to overlap into a lot of different worlds, right? The media is becoming much more of a scrutinizer on this, more regulations coming out of certainly Europe, but now we're starting seeing it in the US, as I think a lot of communicators struggle to really be transparent while trying to tell their story on ESG. Talk a little bit about how the work you do helps them in that journey.
Absolutely. So look, it's there's been an explosion of ESG, and because of that explosion, companies I think have felt sort of forced to actually say something about ESG and start sort of making announcements and creating a narrative about ESG. ESG, it's all about transforming the business to actually be more sustainable. That's what ESG is about. So it's less about creating an annual report, but it's more about saying we are transforming the business and this is the impact that we're actually making. So I think once this sort of furor in a way sort of calms down, I think because there's been Elon Musk was saying, put a tweet, I think it was in March, when he says the ESG was the devil incarnate, and you've actually had other voices sort of trying to sort of create a sort of an anti-ESG sentiment. I think ESG is here to stay because actually it's the new way of doing business, and businesses will have to be sustainable. But that actually means that companies, like in every way that companies operate, should always operate authentically, and should actually communicate authentically, and shouldn't sort of give in to the pressure from other forces to actually make claims, because in the end, what's the worst that can happen to you if you actually don't you're sort of making claims that you cannot back up? Then someone is going to say they are greenwashing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
you talk about this a little bit in the book, and forgive me, I'll forget the terms you used, but to that point of authenticity, like if you're Apple and you're focused on profit, be transparent about it, be upfront about it. If you're, I think the other examples were Patagonia and Unilever. Yes. And understanding the story you're pushing out there in this age of hyper-transparency has to be what you're backing up. How much is that is still, the book, I'll just say, is 4 years old. I'm just curious, pre-COVID, post-COVID, how much of that is still true? How much do you see that evolving these days and even into the future?
Look, I think these are sort of kind of universal principles. It's people will respect you if you actually are authentic. People will not respect you if you are phony. And trying to be all things to everybody, in the end, is not going to work. So I think this is also what stakeholders demand these days, and consumers demand, that actually, tell us where you stand on these issues.
I guess another way to ask it is, are you seeing more and more pressure even on those profit-focused companies first to do more on ESG, and how do they manage those stakeholders and that pressure, even if that's not who they are and who their business is?
Yeah, so I think in the context, just to sort of apply a bit of context here. So when I did the analysis, and the analysis is now 5 years old, you could actually see three focuses. One is profit first. There was another one which is profit and society, and then you actually had society first. Mm-hmm. So within society first, and that's where I put Patagonia, actually you could see the businesses that become B Corps, and they are sort of building the business around making themselves accountable to all stakeholders. Ways profit first, it doesn't mean that they are bad businesses, because they create a lot of value, but the priority is shareholders. And then you had a company like Unilever that actually was trying to find the balance between shareholders and stakeholders. Then if you fast forward, the research for the book was 2017. It was published in 2018. Then you fast forward, and I think it was in August 2019 when the Business Roundtable said, actually, we're changing our sort of manifesto. We are going to be, we sort of embracing stakeholder capitalism, and we are going to be accountable to all stakeholders. So obviously that has actually made companies to be much more sort of aware of the impact that stakeholders have and being more inclusive to stakeholders. And that's why then it becomes kind of business as usual.
Right. Let me wrap up a couple more questions. Just curious about what's next for Alva, the technology you're working on. I mean, obviously more and more work with HPS and folks can stay tuned on that. But in terms of actually the offerings and issues you're looking at out in the space and in the market, what are you kind of focused on for what's next?
Look, I think, again, it's about how do we provide a sort of a complete picture or as complete picture as possible to actually our clients. And this is all about bringing in new data sets that actually are proxies for additional perceptions, but not only bringing new data sets, but also combining other data sets.
Right.
Because actually businesses sit on a lot of data, sit on a lot of intelligence. So a lot of the value, I think that the value in the future will be on knowing how to integrate multiple data sets and knowing how to draw insights from those multiple data sets that actually allow the company to make decisions to create value. Because ultimately, whether you are profit first or society first, it's all about value creation. It's economic value, but also social value. So it's how can we actually enrich that intelligence? That's kind of the end goal.
Yeah, Matt, I'm curious your thoughts. How we kind of manage all of that, right? You bring in the
I just think
intelligence,
that
the research.
I mean, Alberto said it, but just to put a finer point on it, is that when this is done really effectively, it is about the insights, the actionable insights that tell you something you don't know or enrich your understanding of the stakeholders that you are thinking about. And I think this is part of the reason that, I would say we're excited about the partnership with Alva is that, I think that where I've seen data in our space fall flat or fail is when it's a bit of a fun with numbers exercise where someone wants to see charts. Literally, they want to see charts. What the chart says or what the implications are secondary to, well, I got this meeting and I need to have a chart, right? And I think that's where the power of the data combined with the insights and the advisory really helps clients see through a chaotic environment to understand what is important and what is not important. And that is the type of insight that drives decision making, that drives value, that creates a company that knows where it is going and understands how to get there.
Right. Well, let's leave it there. Certainly more to talk about on these issues in the future. But Alberto, thanks for joining us on HPS Insights. Matt, always a pleasure to have you back here with us. For those of you listening, you can find out more. I'll put in the show notes some information on Alberto's book and Alva, and you can always find more information about our work and our podcast at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or by following us on Twitter at HPS Insight. I'm your host, Brian DeAngelis. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Insights podcast, produced by Hamilton Place Strategies. For the latest updates, follow us on Twitter at HPS Insights and follow us on the web at hamiltonplacestrategies.com.